Greetings all, it's Max and we are back. Today we're going to talk about intellectual dishonesty. What is intellectual dishonesty? It's twisting an argument to try and prove your point. And this could be dishonest to other people, but primarily the people that are engaged in this are dishonest to themselves and ignore arguments that don't fit in with their ideas to the point where they're completely blinded. Now, as far as this faith and works system goes, there's a lot of cults out there who are blinded and are intellectually dishonest in how they support their opinions on this. Being an sort of Seventh-day Adventist myself, I can prove you some faith work systems. Sure, but I would be intellectually dishonest in doing so. And now what we've been engaging in for about a week or two now is a familiar process of people regurgitating things that are just intellectually dishonest on the idea that works will get you into heaven. What is their argument? Well, in the Old Testament, there's all these works that people do, and they have to do them to go to heaven, along with their faith. We're going to go to Proverbs 26:5. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Conceit is imagination. Lest he be wise is don't let him be. You got to point it out so he doesn't think he's wise in his own conceit. So we have the argument. Works does something for your salvation in the Old Testament and in the tribulation and going forward to the millennium, I'm going to guess. Everything except the Pauline epistles. Why? Because Paul says that your works mean nothing. Never mind that it's other places in the Bible too. We'll just say Paul. We'll go ahead with that. And Paul, well, that's the dispensation of the church age, so we can throw all that out. Well, we're not even gotten that far yet. Okay? Wise in your own imaginations? You acknowledge the fact that no one can do the work. Nobody. How can works save you then, if you acknowledge nobody can do the work? That's a logical fallacy. There is no point in arguing anything after that, at all. All right? You can't acknowledge that works saved you, or say that works saved you, and also acknowledge that nobody kept the works. That's a logical fallacy. You don't have an argument. You can stop bringing up all of these scriptures from all these different places because it doesn't matter. You already kicked yourself in the butt. Now, if I were to prove works in the Old Testament, I would never say that nobody could do the law. That would defeat my argument. And you're going to say, well, they didn't do the law, but they had the sacrifices. It's the sacrifices that did it. All right. Hebrews 10:1-4. We'll keep covering this. This is where intellectual dishonesty comes in. We aren't actually going to read the scriptures for what they are. We're going to put our own predetermined ideas upon them. For the law having a shadow of good things to come. What was the law for? A shadow of good things to come. How does a shadow of something save you? And not the very image of things, but that's supposed to save people. Can never those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect? Well, this is Paul in the New Testament, right? That's the argument. See, this is Paul in the New Testament. See, before they meant something, but now they don't because it's in dispensation of the church. Can you get much more dishonest than that, intellectually? As though God changes. Oh, you could work for heaven and boast all you wanted to in the Old Testament. In the church age, you can't. Now it's by grace alone. We'll get more into this. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? Right. Why do you keep sacrificing? Because that the worshippers once purged should have had no more conscience of sins. Right. Once they sacrificed a lamb, why are they still doing all the works? Their sins are done. Still think they're working their way into Abraham's bosom. Oh yes, that's right. We want to have contention over this. I can't say that they were saved when they're in Abraham's bosom, because people are such numbskulls and they don't have arguments that they're going to go off on rabbit trails and go, well, they weren't technically saved. They were in Abraham's bosom. Get out of here with that nonsense. Intellectual dishonesty. Those people in Abraham's bosom were saved people waiting for the cross. Oh, they weren't technically saved because Jesus didn't go in the cross. Get out of here. Get out of here with that. The same type of garbage you hear about, David's son Solomon. Technically, Solomon wasn't the wisest man on earth. Jesus was here. That's the same sort of attitude. Technically, they weren't saved in Abraham's bosom. All right. But in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. There's a what? A remembrance in the sacrifices. Is that what they're for? I thought these get you to heaven. Oh, wait, this is Paul in the New Testament. Talking to Hebrews, though. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. Well, Paul's only talking about the New Testament. Intellectual dishonesty. Verse 4. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. For it is not possible. Definite. Not possible. Not possible. Don't you think Paul would have said in there, for it is not now possible, if he meant anything other than what the words say? That's all. When you come up with scriptures like this, intellectually dishonest people will say, "Oh, that's in a different dispensation." Like God changes, and the words don't really mean what they say. The words plainly say, plainly, it is not possible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. That means that your sacrifices in the Old Testament did nothing for your eternal salvation. Nothing. So, your argument goes like this. No one could keep the law, and the sacrifices meant nothing, but you have faith plus works to get into heaven. That's your argument. It's stupid. You know what? This afternoon, I actually put together a faith works argument that kicks the crap out of the one Ruckman came up. Okay? It's not hard. All I got to do is be intellectually dishonest. Just a little bit. You know, the reason that I don't is because there's going to be some cult out there that takes my idea and my BS, right, and starts a cult over it. That's why I don't. The other reason is it's about pride. I'm like, boy, I can come up with a better argument than these guys have. Now, you want to get to the crux of a situation of an argument, you need to put yourself in the shoes of your opponent and look at what they are saying and see if you can defend the argument from their position. There is no defending faith works in any dispensation. It can't be done honestly. If you want to be intellectually dishonest and ignore what the scripture plainly say, I use the Bible. Well, so do the cults. Doesn't mean anything if you're not using it correctly. If you're being intellectually dishonest. Faith plus works in the Old Testament tribulation. Never could do the works. Sacrifice of bulls and goats means nothing. I guess everybody's going to hell. Right? Why worship God at that point? Everyone's going to hell. No one can do this stuff. We're going to go to Ephesians. Oh, New Testament, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. And you hath quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sins, wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of power in the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. This is Paul speaking to Gentiles, and the children of disobedience were the Jews, among whom also we had our conversation in times past, in the lust of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh of the mind, and we were by nature children of wrath, even as others. So the Jews are children of wrath. It's a good thing they had them sacrifices that did nothing for their salvation. It's a good thing they had all those works. It's a good thing. But God, who is rich in mercy, who is God? This must just be the God of the New Testament. Because in the Old Testament, they had to do works. For his great love wherewith he loved us. Even when we were dead in sins, he hath quickened us together with Christ. By grace ye are saved. Well, see, it's because of Christ. Right? It all just New Testament has to do with Christ. The old God, God the Father, he just wanted to smite everybody. And that's what a lot of people say that aren't Christians. They don't want to deal with the Old Testament God. And hath raised us together and made us sit together in heavenly places in Jesus Christ. Well, Jesus is coming up. We're in the church age then. So whatever here applies now, and all that other stuff in the Bible just doesn't apply at all. This is a new thing. This is a new God we're worshiping. It's a new God. And hath raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenly places in Jesus Christ, that in ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace in his kindness toward us through Jesus Christ. Well, that's funny because one of you guys' arguments is that the tribulation, apparently there is no grace with Jesus Christ anymore. Apparently we're back to doing works. Paul's a liar here. And through Paul, God is a liar. His word is lying to you. If you want to listen to these dishonest people, intellectually dishonest people. For by grace are ye saved through faith, not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. This only applies to the church age, apparently. Right? Only applies to the church age? Is that how that argument goes? Because God changes. God is a God of chaos and confusion. Not of works, lest any man should boast. But boasting is okay. You see these logical arguments here? Boasting is okay in the Old Testament. If you are for faith works in the Old Testament, you have to conclude that works and boasting about your works is how you got saved in the Old Testament. But none of that matters because nobody could keep the works anyway. Everyone's going to hell. For we are his workmanship, created in Jesus Christ unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Look at that. We're supposed to do good works today and before and going on in the future. How about that? How about that? That's what you're supposed to do. Does it say that you're doing this for your salvation? No. It says that we are created to do good works and worship him. Yeah. That's what it says. Now, we say there's a lot about Jesus Christ in the New Testament. I mean, who is this guy? He sounds pretty magnificent. Before we had to do all this work to get into heaven, and now we have Jesus Christ, and now we don't have to do anything. Is that what that says in verse 10? Does verse 10 apply to the Old Testament as well? Created in Christ unto good works. Why were men created? Let's go back to Adam. Who is this Jesus Christ fellow? When Jesus is on earth in the form of a man, wasn't he talking to Adam? So Jesus was there. Wasn't Jesus talking to Abraham? It's the same guy. Same God. And you're going to tell me the Old Testament, the same Jesus Christ, died on the cross, is saying, you can work your way to heaven. You do realize that the law, in order to keep the law, you have to be God. That is the whole point. The law wasn't intended to be a way to heaven. It's intended to point out how wicked people are and understand why they need a Savior. Working my way to heaven. Nobody could keep it. Ergo, you have to be in hell. And it is by grace of God that you are not in hell and you go to heaven. Nothing has changed in that regard. The difference is, New Testament, God is not going to smite you for keeping all those Levitical laws and become a member of Judaism. Because the need for that is no longer there. Jesus Christ has come. Everything was built working up to his coming. He's the Messiah to the Jews. They had their chance. Done. Now we're into the church age. And then we want to bring back works of the law. These people, Peter Ruckman, must have had a falling in with the Seventh-day Adventist, because it's very, very similar doctrine putting forth there. And it is just him. Let's not beat around the bush. It is just Peter Ruckman and cults that teach this. Does that make Peter Ruckman a cultist? That's a good question. I can't answer that. I don't know enough about the guy. But it's essentially the same argument that Seventh-day Adventism has. Saved by works in the Old Testament. Primarily they were focused on the Jews and the law. And you have to understand when this law started. Why did the law start? Well, the Jews had just been enslaved for generations in Egypt, and they're coming out, and they need to get beat back into shape. That's the purpose of the law. There wasn't law before that, before Moses. What else do we have up here? Answer the fool according to his folly. If you're going to go into a debate or an argument with someone with these faith works things, and they acknowledge that nobody could keep the law, you've already won the argument. There's nothing to even talk about anymore. They can bring up scriptures until they're blue in the face. So can a Seventh-day Adventist, to try and prove this silly doctrine. And to say, oh, well, that's just in another dispensation. That's not an answer. Or to say, God can do what he wants. When I make mention of the character of God, you're basically saying God's a liar. Well, God can do what he wants and how he saves people. Really? Really? Doesn't God need to be perfectly fair, perfectly just, perfectly truthful? We've lost the argument before it even began. And like I said, if you want to try and continue on with this stuff, the only way you're going to do it is by saying that people could keep the law in some way, shape, or form in the Old Testament. Otherwise, you got nothing. And you want to pretend like Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, walking around on earth, is not the same God that created Adam and Eve and everything else. Walked with Adam in the garden. Was riding in the boat with Noah. You want to pretend that's not the same Jesus Christ? You're out of your mind, and you're being intellectually dishonest. I fooled myself for a long time and could argue Seventh-day Adventism with the best of them. But eventually people started coming up with some good arguments that I had to re-examine and actually truthfully look at them from that perspective. And lo and behold, after a while, it was like, yeah, well, the Jews might have been saved by works. I don't know about the tribulation. Seems like the mark is maybe a work. I don't know. To eventually arrive at the conclusion that it's quite plainly simple and easy that everybody has been saved by faith. Going back and going forward. It's what it is. It is what it is. And this idea that, well, it's in a different dispensation, therefore God's different, is passing the buck. Or saying God can do what he wants is passing the buck. That's effectively giving up and saying, I cannot answer your question. And there's a lot of that in a faith work system. There's a lot of you can't answer the question. And they want to go back and forth, and they'll come out with, 4 or 5 paragraphs of blah, 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 and scripture this, and blah, 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 blah. And you answer them a simple thing like, well, where did such and such go if all of that is true that you told me? And then they come out with another 5 paragraphs of stuff that is not even related to the question that you asked. But answer the fool according to his folly. If no one did the works, how are they in Abraham's bosom? How was that possible? Oh, through the blood of goats and lambs and their sacrifices. They had a sin offering back then. Paul explains that never did anything for them. That was a ritual and a tradition that was specific to the Jews. A picture of Christ coming and a shadow of things to come. Oh, but he's speaking in a different dispensation. Paul was in both of them, as far as I know. Interesting. He counted all of his works as dung. All those things that he did. It was all meaningless, he said. That's what I have to say about that. We're out of here.